Hi everyone, and welcome to today's interview. Today I'm talking with Belinda McFarlane in London, and Belinda is a member of the London Symphony Orchestra and also part of our Aeyons violin faculty. As you will have noted from the first couple of interviews, if you've seen them, the aim of this is just to kind of demystify or get to know our musicians and the journey that they've been on to become the musicians they are today. So it'd be great, Belinda, welcome firstly, and also just get a bit of an understanding of your journey and how you've gone, as I know personally, I've known you, for some time, and how you've actually gone all the way from here in Australia and ended up as a violinist in the London Symphony Orchestra.
Nice to be here. So okay, so the whole story, I'll try to abridge it. So I was lucky enough, I grew up in Adelaide, and my family liked music. No one was a professional musician, though both of my grandmothers were actually talented musicians. My granny Bessie was a cornet player in the Streaky Bay brass band and a pianist. And she played all her life for choirs and things like that. And actually, she probably gave me my first music lessons by writing in lead pencil on the piano and writing on the music. And when we used to stay over, we'd play piano like that. And my paternal grandmother actually was a contralto, and she won an Eisteddfod as a young woman, which gave her the opportunity to study in Sydney. But she decided, I think she was engaged. And so she... didn't take up the scholarship and stayed and had her 6 children in Adelaide. She always sang though as well and played the piano. But so music was in the light, but nobody was a professional musician or anything like that. And I think I did father-daughter recorder lessons when I was about 7 with my dad, and he said straight away I was better than him, even though he said he was useless. So I learned recorder, and I loved music. My parents always played all sorts of music, classical included. And I went to Mitcham Primary School, and they had a music branch program to learn. And it was literally someone came to the classroom and said, if you want to learn the violin or the cello, go to the library at lunchtime. And I thought, oh, that sounds nice. So I went to the library at lunchtime. And then I had to sing Happy Birthday, I think. And then they said, do you want to play violin or cello? And I thought, I walked to school. I think I'll play the violin. So I learned in classes, state-funded music lessons, which was just a fantastic opportunity. And it was Mitcham Primary School, and it had a little school orchestra, and we all played. And then there was, as I got older, there was combined state primary school, another one, and you played at the Adelaide Festival Theatre. And, I absolutely loved it. From the minute I got a violin, I just loved it. I loved it. And so I sort of progressed, and finally then I think after a few years learning in groups, I think the teacher approached my parents and said, you might want to find her a private teacher because, she loves it and she's going well. So then I had that. And then it was very soon after the 4 state high schools opened up with music programs, and so I went to Marriotteville, which was they were, well, I suppose they still are, an aptitude-based entrance for music students to give them it was normal high school, but with a leaning on classical, on a music course. And they had an amazing setup. It was a newly formed school from about 1976, I think we worked out, didn't we? And it absolutely set me on my path, because it was just amazing to turn up in year 8 into a class of other music students of all, some were very advanced, way more advanced than I was. But it was just being with peers like that and doing, classroom choir and lunchtime choir and orchestra and chamber groups, and just having that intense exposure to music, fantastic music teachers. And I just thrived, from there and loved it so much. And from there I went into single studies towards the end of my high school years at the Conservatorium at Adelaide Uni, Elder Con, and with Ronald Woodcock And then I went and did my Bachelor of Music Performance at Adelaide, at the Elder Con. So it was really just a pathway of opportunity that opened up to me, because these things were there to be, you know, to sort of inspire my enthusiasm and what was probably talent and all of those things, as well as, you know, parents who were happy to put up with all the practice and pick me up after school from things like that. But so it was really fantastic. And I never ever thought about not doing anything else, but just, it was just always my passion. I really, you know, I never had to be told to practice or anything. I don't think I always practiced very properly, but I grew up in quite an old house, and it had this huge, very sort of very unique bathroom, which was as big as a living room, and it was all tiled, and it was my favorite place to play, because of course you sound marvelous when you're in an acoustic like that. So I did a lot of hours in that bathroom, but I don't think I did a lot of scales in it. I think I just loved playing. And then went to uni, and of course the Australian Youth Orchestra organisation kicked in, and I went to, you know, I went to state music camps, and then I went to the national music camp. I didn't do many of those, but then I did Australian Youth Orchestra from 1984 to 1988. I started as the last violin of the second violins in 1984 when we did a European tour, and then in 1988 I was the concertmaster, the leader of the orchestra. So it was a zigzag through the whole section, which was quite nice. And the last concert on that tour, European tour in 1988, was in London at the Proms. And I'd finished my university in honours by then, and I'd already moved to Sydney and worked for a year as a freelancer. And I'd basically saved and self-funded further. I wanted to stay in London and study. I didn't really have the funds to do a postgrad or anything like that. And in my time, there weren't so many scholarships available to young musicians in Australia, which was, you know, which was difficult. So it was self-funding. But I was lucky. I also worked in the South Australian Opera all the way through uni, which was was great training, and B, a great experience. I loved doing opera, and, you know, it was professional work. So, you know, I'd managed to save money. So I came over to London. I stayed in London at the end of that trip, because we'd been flown, of course, with the youth orchestra, and I had something like it was something like $10,000, which in those days was about what it was £2,500. It was not very much money. But I just thought, I've got this. I'm going to stay in London. I had the name of a teacher, and I had someone to lodge with, and I just thought, I'm going to see what happens. I mean, it seems a little bit crazy now. And I did. I stayed, and I had the lessons, which I loved. I then found work with a sort of gigging quartet, which did things like play in pubs and at weddings, of course, but also did a lot of busking in Covent Garden, which in winter, which was quite an experience. So I sort of started to get little bits of work, and I just lapped up London lifestyle. You know, it's just so fertile here. You know, you could go to concerts twice a day, 7 days a week, and just see so many types of musicians, and it was such an eye-opener. And I loved it, and I sort of hung on in there and stayed, and then eventually started freelancing sort of with, you know, more known orchestras. I worked a lot in Bournemouth in a chamber orchestra called the Bournemouth Sinfonietta, which is no longer an orchestra. They still have a symphony there. And then I started going for jobs, and I was lucky enough to get a job in the LSO, which was sort of a dream, because of course people my age and generation, you know, we'd all grown up with that famous Star Wars album, you know, that we'd all been to see Star Wars, and we all bought the record, and it was the London Symphony. And when I went to concerts in London of the London Symphony, I always just thought, it really has a sparkle that I love this orchestra. You know, there's so many good orchestras here, and they're all different styles. That's what I loved about moving to London, was just just the broadness of experience, and just going to see the Philharmonia or the Royal Philharmonic or the London Symphony, and all these amazing orchestras, but all quite different and different styles, and so many musicians. You could get lost, but I actually found a freedom in getting lost, that I could just like sit in my own little bubble and soak up all the experiences. And I learned from a guy called Manny Hurwitz, who's no longer with us. He was an old master English violinist. I learned from him for a couple of years, and then I actually studied with an Australian fabulous teacher called Carmel Kane, who's also sadly no longer with us. So I just self-funded those lessons, and didn't really go into a music college or anything like that. And then I got the job in the LSO in about 1991, which was a huge thrill. And actually, it still is. It's nearly 30 years that I've been playing with the orchestra, and it still is. And especially this year when we had to stop so suddenly, and we because it's a punishing schedule in a London orchestra. It's a different type of lifestyle, and but I've actually found that quite thrilling. I've enjoyed that, and there's a lot of touring, so I've seen a lot of the world, which I loved. And I think my first AYO tour was like going around Europe, playing concerts every night, and I thought, well, this is the life I would like. And I'm very lucky that's the life I ended up with. So that's how I got to the LSO.
Fantastic.
If that's enough information or too
What
much.
a journey. It's incredible.
Yeah,
I think now you, if I'm right, you run one of the education programs for the LSO.
Well, the LSO has a community music program called Discovery, with a capital D, because it's more than education. It's about engagement. So it's a whole department that is equal to the LSO, and players from the orchestra are involved in it in all different ways. Some of us across the board of its activities, and some just in various parts. So of course, at one end we have the coaching of colleges and music colleges and conservatoires, and that sort of level of coaching. But then we also, I do a lot of workshops with babies and toddlers, we have animateurs who are specialists in running those things. Also working with young musicians and of all abilities. It's sort of non-selective. So we have 10 boroughs of London, which is sort of not suburbs, they're bigger than suburbs, but they're that's sort of all in the East London, which is quite a challenged area. It's very large, and we do a lot of work in the schools and with school teachers, helping train school teachers who aren't musicians to teach music in primary school. So I've done all sorts of things, from sitting in sandpits with a violin, to lying on the floor with babies and a violin, and listening to what they're creating on their xylophones, to standing up and training a whole room of multi-stringed instruments of complete multi-ability, from like beginner to one of the most significant things we did was take a group of school children of all abilities and train them up to make an orchestra for the opening ceremony of the London Olympics in 2012. And that was just an extraordinary experience, because A, we got to play in it, but B, I walked out into the great huge arena of the opening ceremony with a little 8-year-old boy next to me to go and play a specially arranged version of Nimrod by Elgar. And yes, sometimes it might be my conception that runs it. I've been forming a program for called the East London Academy, along with the administration staff and other LSO musicians. And that's a program aimed at inspiring and opening doors and opportunities for musicians who face barriers to backgrounds and other types of barriers to entering the music profession. So, there's all sorts of things like that. There's all sorts of barriers for people to enter the music profession, as we know. There's access to music lessons, support in the home, huge financial things, cultural things for the support, just education, challenging circumstances, and it does mean that in our broad classical music world, there's a lot of underrepresentation from areas of our community, which is very, very sad. And I'm quite passionate advocate of addressing this. And I think it's a bit because of my background, because I know that it was opportunity that that opened up a world to me that meant that I did so much with my musical life. It was all of those inspirations. It takes so much for that to happen. And I feel, in today's world, some of those opportunities that have really narrowed, and I think it's quite telling. And then you get in this cycle of people feeling like it's not their world, and then they wouldn't enter it. So that's been a fantastic program. It's in its very early stages, and of course it had to stop this year, but we did some online stuff and things like that with these such great young teenagers they are from East London schools. So I've done all sorts of things, but then I've also run programs outside of the LSO and done them in other countries like India and China and in Australia, sort of bringing music to life in a way that it's digestible, taking it out of its glass case, which is one of my big passions, because I just think there's no need for that glass case. It's too much time, sitting stiffly on stage. That is part of what we do, is to create a concert on stage. But some of the traditions around our performing, I feel, are outmoded. And it's nothing to do, we need our elite, as in small e, elite art form, to be so polished and to be of that extreme finesse that our great orchestras have. That has to be there, but it has to be so much more. And it also has to be, it needs to dissipate into the wider community we need to work harder and harder at that, I think, to make it more relevant, because it is completely relevant. But if you ask, if you ask people about it, they say, oh, music's not for me. And you think, well, it's not true, because music's in your life the whole time, and there's not really any difference. And I get a huge amount out of this sort of work, because I like the one-on-one. And during lockdown, although I missed playing in my amazing orchestra and playing amazing concerts with great conductors and soloists, which I will always, always adore doing, I realized the thing that I was really starved of was all this interaction I have with the sort of teaching and mentoring and coaching and creating music, and being in a room physically expressing music, back and forth, and communicating. I work a lot with special needs, some really severe special needs, young musicians and adults, and that music is such an amazing way to communicate with them, because you can't use words and sometimes you can't use physicality either, but music is such a unique way to communicate like that. So, and I don't think I could do any of it without each of it. So I feel like that side of my work really informs my performance of my standard performing, completely informs it. I feel I'm a much better all-round musician and communicator of the essence of music than I was, as a youngster, when I was sort of less experienced. But I also feel like I couldn't do that sort of work if I hadn't had all of the informing that I've had from all these amazing conductors and players I'm surrounded by in the orchestra, and in that sort of elite world of orchestra, that finesse of orchestral playing, to have got to that level and to maintain it for all these years, and to learn. You just sort of, it's osmosis from everyone around you. And I feel very privileged to have worked with such incredible musicians, and I always feel like they leave behind a little bit of them in my thing. I feel like I've never stopped learning. I'll still be playing with a musician now, on stage, or making music with someone in a workshop somewhere, and I still learn stuff. And I find, well, it feeds me. So yeah, again, in lockdown, that's been hard because that's sort of, but I have maintained online work with some musicians, and sometimes that's brought about surprising revelations as well.
Thanks so much, Belinda. That's incredibly inspiring. Really is. It's amazing to hear the the passion for teaching, because it's I stopped teaching some time ago to explore this digital world myself, but that's, you know, what it meant to me too. Just to be able to have that capability of doing something that, if you did it the right way, could really transform lives. I think it's an incredible gift to be actually given the chance to teach. It's more than just getting, you know, making money. There's so much more. It's an incredible chance to be able to do something to direct lives. And I know that's really why, you know, I started this company and what I wanted to do here, and what we're going to be making some announcements about in the near future that I look forward to talking to you in more depth about after this conversation, because our whole reason for what we're doing with myself and Gerard, the CEO of the company, is building access. Everything around it's the development from where we are now, which is kind of a fee for service, I guess. Find, you know, one of these incredible teachers and pay for a lesson. But what's coming and what we're working at the moment is actually all driven by access, and the platform and the way we're developing it as we go on in the coming months. Actually, it's only going to be a matter of months now with some of our terrific partnerships that we've just about to announce. But it's all about what you were talking about, and obviously we'll continue this conversation over the next bit of time, because you're talking our language. Access is key, and we want to try and
it is, it's really an access and opportunity. And I think, and you're right, I mean, teaching, it really feeds me, and it's about the imparting of knowledge. But my way of teaching is always to release potential. So the way I teach or work with music with other people is actually the same premise, whether I'm in a sandpit with a baby, or whether I'm non-verbally engaging with someone who can't hear or communicate like that, or whether I've got, you know, a young hotshot violinist who's possibly better than me, you know, can play their concertos on the stage better than me, but it's still releasing their own knowledge, and so that they can inform themselves. And that's also that's the theme of my teaching, is that to identify what it is that will release something, and that you know, when you find a solution for someone, and or else you release in them knowledge that they find it themselves. That's really the key, I think, to teaching, rather than, you know, dictating how you should play something. It's more about people, releasing potential is always the way. And whether that's, you know, so I've taught children who, you know, have not had any formal training, but have got a bright pink violin, and they love it, but they can't really play it. But I've still, you know, got them on stage with the LSO, absolutely in control of what they can play to the best of their ability, you know. And I've, you know, had the privilege of working with amazing young musicians, like in Australian Youth Orchestra and youth orchestras over here in Europe, and teaching them the craft of orchestral playing, or, you know, and I also teach a lot of chamber music, and it's the same, you know. It's all about teaching music, I think, because it's often the answer is a musical answer it's a musical answer that solves a technical problem. That's also, you know, what I think often. Fantastic.
Really appreciate you giving your time today, Belinda. It's been wonderful to talk to you, and yeah, very exciting. Look forward to catching up if you're back in Australia, and yeah, it's wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, it's very nice to see you too.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah, great.